The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. You're listening to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. I'm JC Rader.
And I'm Julian Schroeder.
And we're therapists bringing you honest conversations around emotional wellness and self-development.
Inspired by our personal experiences in therapy and because of our clients, we realize therapy has so much to offer both on and off the couch. Listen for tips and tools to navigate all the challenges that life throws your way.
To give us feedback on topics and guests, or for more information on our community events, counseling, or online services, contact us at everydaytherapypodcast.com. Before we get started today, let's talk a little bit about our sponsors. So sponsor number one, Lifeology, one of my favorite group private practices in the area. To I refer all my clients that I can't see or maybe can't afford pricing, different reasons. They're a collaborative community. So I think they have, like 5 or 6 different locations.
All across the Metroplex.
Yeah. 30
so
different
North
therapists.
Dallas.
Yeah, all over. So North Dallas, Fort Worth, Richardson, Plano, Frisco, Oak Cliff, Austin, and even Grand Rapids, Michigan. Cedar Hill coming soon, right?
Yeah. Did I tell you I was born in Grand Rapids?
No.
Anyways, so they're taking over the world.
Yeah, and so they're known, their like catchphrase is creative solutions for stuck problems. So they really hire really creative therapists. So it's not just your typical therapy appointment, and it's so groovy. Like they have the most groovy lounge, waiting area, rooms, which makes a difference, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
your environment.
No, absolutely. I can attest to that.
Yes.
Yeah. So creative solutions to stuck problems.
And
That's our motto.
and they work with a variety of different issues. So anxiety, depression, PTSD, trichotillomania, everything. As well as they see clients in the evening and mornings.
And weekends.
Yeah,
Yes.
which you can't find that very often. And a variety of pricing as well. So on the lower end to the upper end, depending on what therapist that you see. So we're so appreciative to them
Yes.
and really support them as a practice.
Yes, and to build off their intent to have creative solutions to stuck problems, they have created this school called Lifeology Institute for Psychotherapeutic Yoga, LISP for short. And I am a proud graduate. JC's a proud graduate.
It's an amazing program.
Yeah, so they're really looking at acknowledging the mind-body connection and being able to create wellness and change with yoga for mental health, for changing the way that your brain operates.
Yeah, so they have a 200-hour Yoga Alliance certification, as well as a lot of different workshops. So if you want to be a yoga teacher, or if you just want to do it for your own personal self-development.
Yeah, or if you're a therapist wanting more tools to help your client in and out of the room.
Yeah.
It's something to check out. So
It's called, and they also say yoga for your brain. So it's not just a traditional yoga teacher training program.
Yeah.
It adds in neurobiology along with the yoga Eastern sciences.
yes, so
Thank you,
lispy.com.
Lispy. They're amazing. Yes, and now we can talk about our topic today. So excited to have Casey Bonano.
Banano.
I love
It's hard. It's a hard
so
one.
Cute.
Yes, my main name was hard too, so I'm very used to it.
Okay. Same. I have a difficult first name, JC.
Jay-Z.
Yeah, JC. Yeah, it's difficult. But yes, so you are a dietitian.
Correct.
And are an anti-dietitian.
Correct.
Which I love that. It's so
Yeah,
different.
it's a self-proclaimed title.
Yes, and I said on our Instagram, and I know that you appreciated it, rebel with a cause.
Yes. Oh my God, I loved that. I was like, I'm going to use that now.
Yes. How did you get into that world?
Well, so I guess probably the first taste that I had of it was in an internship in my last rotation as a dietetic intern. I interned with a private practice dietitian that specialized in eating disorders and intuitive eating. And so that was kind of the first taste that I got of it, and I really enjoyed it, really liked it. Then, I just went out into the world, got a clinical job, kind of worked a couple years, and then I really dove into the eating disorder world. I worked at a couple different treatment centers, and it's kind of just been a real, progression of, intuitive eating, and then just seeing how much diet culture is really just pervasive, and it's kind of evolved into this kind of following of like anti-diet culture, whatever you want to call it. And there's actually quite a few dietitians that kind of are also self-proclaimed anti-diet dietitians, kind of like a new movement that not everyone, but a population of dietitians are kind of jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah. And I feel like we're so in that world, like for us as therapists and you as an anti-diet dietitian, of like knowing what diet culture means. But
Right.
what is that? Like, how do you explain that to your clients?
Right. So it's so there's so many levels to it, because of course, like, diet culture is the diets and yo-yo dieting, chronic dieting, all that different kind of, oh, well, you should do this and you should do that, and good versus bad foods, and oh, healthy and unhealthy. But even
It's so ingrained in our culture that
it's
it
so
doesn't even seem like a distinguished part of it.
No, and people don't realize that there's this thing going on.
Yeah.
And it's so ingrained in our healthcare, which is really, really, really scary. But so it's, yes, one side, the diets and all that, but then it's also kind of this systematic belief that thinner bodies are better, that weight loss is always healthier, that restriction is okay, all these different kind of food behaviors, and just the fact that a lot of behaviors that are exhibited in a individual that has a diagnosis of an eating disorders is socially acceptable and prescribed by healthcare providers and just self-proclaimed experts as a means of health.
Yeah, and I've heard like people say, about somebody who has trouble with restriction or whatnot. It's like, oh, I wish I had that. I think we talked about that on another episode, that it's like,
No, trust me, like if you saw what I saw on a daily basis, like you would not be saying that. And I think sometimes people kind of say it flippantly and they don't really know what they're saying, and there's not malintent there, but it really is a struggle. And it really, like, people come to my office and sit there, and I see, individuals with eating disorders, and then I see people who are kind of on the, maybe don't have the diagnosis of an eating disorder, but maybe some disordered eating, chronic dieting, kind of coming to me to get unstuck with food. But they sit and they say to me, like, I don't even know how to eat. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, one person said, like, I don't know what to eat, so I just don't eat. Like, because I just avoid it until I have to, until I get to the point where
removed.
Yeah.
That instinct of eating.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying, there's so many shoulds that creates a lot of doubt and takes away from being able to trust that ultimately your body is going to signal.
Right.
Right. And I mean, that's just one aspect of intuitive eating.
Right. Absolutely. And it's like we're born with this ability to this innate sense to know when to eat, when to stop eating. So like if you think of a baby's going to cry until it's fed, and it's not going to take a bottle if it's full. And over time, what diet culture does is it rips us of that ability. And so it gives you all these rules and it tells you all these things that you should follow. And then all of a sudden, you're no longer listening to your body. You're listening to all these other things that are telling you that your body's wrong. It's like, well, don't listen to your hunger. Don't feed yourself that. Don't honor your cravings. And so it gets really confused and you get this disconnection, and your brain is kind of up here in the clouds and your body's down here on earth, and there's such a disconnection that you don't know that those signals aren't coming, right? Yeah. And so there's so many things, like people don't even know when they're thirsty. Like they don't know, there's all these different signals that our body naturally gives us, and we listen to all this other information, and it really disconnects that internal system. The good thing is that you can get reconnected to that system to know what your body is saying and become more connected. And I know you guys probably have talked lots about mind-body connection, and it all falls under that same kind of philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you described that in such an amazing way. Like I can even see in my own personal story of growing up in diet culture and
Right.
doing all the different diets and having to relearn that myself with friends, clients.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much more work to be done. And thankful that you're a part of it and that we're starting to spread the word, just because it does impact people when they subscribe to this idea of what's right and what's wrong. Like, can you share how that impacts your clients and what you see?
The right versus wrong kind of mentality? Yeah, sure. So I think that is probably the most common thing that I see is this good versus bad mentality. And it really is prescribed. And as dietitians, we're kind of taught that way. And so it's an interesting way to kind of take that information and see, well, what messages are meant for me, what messages aren't meant for me, and what really applies to my life is realistic. But so when we have this good versus bad food mentality, most everything's on the bad list. Like if you think about all the different messages that we've received, like everything's on the bad list.
At one point in time, everything is.
Yeah.
Like if you think about coffee one week, research science
Yes.
tells us one thing. And
It's
then
like
the
the cure
next
for
week-
Alzheimer's. And then
Yeah,
next time.
horrible. It's going to kill you.
Right. Yeah. And
carbs,
And
right?
nutrition
sugar.
is a relatively new science in comparison to other sciences. And so we really do still have a lot to learn, but we kind of get lost in all of the details and all of the, just like little nitty gritty kind of, micronutrients and all of that. And we really, it seems like we come full circle and go back to just like that core basic nutrition that seems to be pretty stellar. And that's what most of the research is like, oh, we'll come back to this like baseline. But so you're right, like everything is on the bad list. I think that most of the time, the only stuff that's on the good list is like
Greens.
vegetables, but only certain ones.
Yeah.
Lean protein, but maybe not even. Like maybe it has to be plant-based,
Yeah.
or and sometimes not even fruit. And that's so minimal. If you think of that, it doesn't even meet your most basic needs. Like there's no dietary fat. Like there's very little carbohydrate. So it doesn't make sense. But we have this list of good and bad, and we think we should follow it. But like we just said, it's completely unrealistic for the human body because it needs beyond what's on our good list. We're eventually going to eat something on the bad list. Then we're going to feel like we did something bad because we went against something we said we shouldn't do. And then we're going to internalize that as we are bad, and we're going to experience guilt and shame as a result of that. And then we're going to go back to our behaviors of restricting to try and feel better. Or we're then going to just eat and say, well, who cares? Throw in the towel. Like, I can't do this. I lost cause. And we get stuck in that vicious diet cycle of behaviors, feeling bad, I am bad. Behaviors, feeling bad, I am bad.
So you're saying there's another way.
There's another way. Yeah, I know. There's another way. Yes.
What in the world? Yes.
So it's complicated. I mean, it's a process, right? Because this stuff is so, like I tell a lot of my patients, it's like we're all brainwashed.
It's unconscious.
It's unconscious. We're all brainwashed, and we have to just constantly unbrainwash ourselves. I say, like, every time someone comes into my office, it's like we're unbrainwashing you because you don't even
love
know
that.
how many times you got exposed to diet culture. I mean, just different things like certain brands use certain diety words to describe their food, and you're like, oh, that sounds good. That sounds healthy. That's for me.
Fat-free.
Right, fat-free, clean. This it's just such common knowledge, and it's so socially acceptable to comment on people's food and to comment on people's bodies, and it's really, really like shocking. The experiences that my patients tell me about of people commenting on their food and body, or like telling them, well, you really should do this and you really should do that kind of thing.
Which is such a personal, individualized experience.
Right. Right.
That seems so wild to me. Because I can see the bodies thing of like maybe people complimenting or.
But it's negative
something.
stuff too. It's
Yeah.
normally more negative than positive.
Yeah.
It's like, I think people think they're helping, but like commenting on someone's food or body or like what they're doing, it's never helpful.
Okay.
Even if you
Note
think,
to all of our listeners,
Yeah, it's-
don't do it.
it's never helpful. Because even if you're saying to someone, oh, wow, you look great. Look, you looks like you lost some weight. Like that person might be going through something where the weight loss was not intent, or you just reinforced a behavior that is maybe not healthy for that person. Like we just don't know the whole story. And so it's always better to just not say anything.
Yeah.
And if you're concerned about someone, obviously there's an appropriate way to approach them. But in general, no comments about food, weight, body, anything like that.
Well, and even saying, oh, you're looking so good, like you've thinned down or something to that effect. I feel like that's saying that they weren't looking good before.
Right, absolutely, spot on. Like you
Yeah.
just basically told them that they weren't okay before, and now they're more acceptable.
Yeah.
Or that's how some people take it. Now, some people, you could say that someone not be affected by it, but it's just better to be cautious because we just don't know everyone's lived experience, and we don't know what it's like to be in that person's body, no matter what their size is.
Right. And well, I come from this desire, a really strong desire to create a paradigm shift where we're connecting not based on appearance or prescribing a value to what somebody does can we just be people?
Right.
Can we say, hey, it's so good to see you?
Right.
Yeah.
I miss your energy and your
Yeah,
personality.
Yeah, like tell me what's new with you.
Right.
I don't want to hear about your freaking diet.
Right, exactly. There's so many more interesting things to talk about. There's so many more interesting parts of people to connect about but that's diet culture. And it's so crazy because there's times where I'll catch my brain doing something that's diet culture, and I have to
sure.
call myself, you bring it back in and you're like, oh, no.
Can you
Like,
think of a recent example?
Oh, just like one example is, I guess, I don't know if this is a good example, but one example is kind of like thinking that higher quality food is better for you. So shopping at like maybe a certain grocery store, it has better food.
That takes your whole paycheck.
Right, exactly.
If you catch my drift.
Yes. So I think it's really interesting because I think, and I don't know, some people might not like this, but I'm just going to say it. I kind of divide it into kind of different categories that get lumped into nutrition that I think isn't really nutrition. So there's like nutrition of like macros and micros and like what things do for our body and, all of that. And then there's food ethics. And then there's food quality. And so I think of ethics as free range, pasture fed, like how animals are treated, how products are made, and that's totally fine. And then there's quality
That
of
could be a value of somebody.
that could be a value system.
Important.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's quality where some foods from certain places or smaller farms or certain things might be of a better quality or of a better grade, but like 3 ounces of beef from this cow and 3 ounces of beef from this cow has the same dividing of like protein, fat, carb, macros, micros, right? So it's okay to think about what parts of those categories are important to you, like you said, a value system. But I think it gets really confusing because it all gets lumped in as nutrition.
Yes. Oh, I so do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that I was doing it.
Right.
So that's
Yeah, and like I said,
helpful to
I do it
distinguish.
too.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Like if I want a higher quality product, that's okay. But just understanding that like my food's not better in a sense because of that.
Right.
Well, it seems like there's so much fear attached to, if I don't do the right thing, then
Right.
there's going to be, I'm not going to, like my body isn't going to be fueling at optimal functioning.
Right.
Right. Which, I mean.
And honestly, we have this, people are probably not going to like this either, but we have very little control over our bodies.
Yeah, and our weight.
And our weight, right? So for sure, we can control what we put in our mouth and what we don't. And And to a certain extent, I suppose, depending on the situation, that might influence certain things. Definitely if you are on the extreme ends. Like if you're in a balanced, kind of moderate, like kind of good flow place, there's less that's going to be impacted. But obviously, if you're either on the very restrictive or very overeating side of things, like putting what goes into your body might impact you more, right? Eventually over time. But at the end of the day, our genetics are our genetics, our build is our build, our shape is our shape. And so there's only so much we can really do to influence what we look like. And I think that's a misconception. Like, oh, if this person just did X, Y, and Z, then they wouldn't be in that body.
Right.
It's
I mean, I've heard this stat, like, apps are made in the kitchen. Well, that's not a stat. That's a phrase.
I love your research, Julian.
This is my research, you guys.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
but well, the stat is like 80% based on nutrition,
yeah.
right? And then you're saying that's a bunch of BS.
Well, and it's not that it's all wrong. It's just, and there's science that definitely, supports some of those claims. It's just that if you're not meant to, if your body doesn't naturally kind of have a muscular physique, you might never have abs, no matter how hard you try, right? So I kind of compare it to I'm a very short person and I can't get taller.
I love that analogy.
I can't change that. I can't change my shoe size either.
Yeah.
Right. And so it kind of doesn't make sense that we're constantly trying to change our body size.
There's only so much of a range that you
Right.
do have control over.
Right.
Which makes me, I know you've talked a little bit about this on your social media, and I just want your perspective, opinion on health at any size.
Yeah.
From kind of a more research-based perspective.
So
And maybe explaining the movement in general.
Right. So, I am well informed. I would not consider myself an expert. I've not been supervised by Linda Bacon or anything like that. But I'm a big fan. Linda.
I don't know who that
Linda.
is.
She is the founder.
Oh,
so
okay.
so big fan, Linda. If you ever hear this,
And I love how her last name's Bacon. Can I just say that?
Yes, it's so awesome. So she, this was her lived experience, and I'm probably paraphrasing poorly, but she basically had some kind of medical issue that she had, her father had too, and they both are in different bodies, different types of bodies or something along those lines, and one was receiving adequate medical treatment that was in a socially more acceptable body, and the other one was continuously prescribed weight loss as a result. And at the end of the day, sure, if certain conditions might be improved with weight loss, but there are other ways to improve medical conditions besides weight loss. And oftentimes weight loss is not an appropriate prescription. So
It's overprescribed.
it's overprescribed and people are undertreated because of it. So health at every size is really, it's more than just, it's not being healthy at any size. It's really about respecting all bodies, all body types, and seeing that just because someone is not in a socially thin, ideal kind of body doesn't mean that they're unhealthy or that they're lazy or that they have no willpower or that they don't eat right or that they don't exercise, that sort of thing. So it's more of and there's so much great research in the book, and the book actually has some really great science in it and some really great case studies. And so I really recommend that people read it because it's very eye-opening and it really makes you realize that there is such a weight stigma, especially in the United States. And they're doing more and more research proving that weight stigma is it is worse for our health than any amount of weight or weight gain, weight loss, whatever. So there's again that mind-body connection. So if people who are stigmatized actually become more unhealthy because of weight stigma versus weight.
The actual weight on their body.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
Fascinating. We'll definitely list that in our show notes too for listeners to read and everything.
Yeah. It's a good one. It's a good resource.
oh yeah, I guess it was just, when there's judgment and criticism, it just never turns out well.
Right.
And there are physical implications of that.
Well, and I think that's also another thing that diet culture perpetuates is like all those misbeliefs, all those distorted beliefs about what a person's size says about that person.
Yeah.
And they're, and then on the other end of the spectrum of someone with like a diagnosable eating disorder, it's that fear of weight gain, that fear of being in a larger body doesn't exist without weight stigma or without fat phobia, because we wouldn't be afraid of being fat if we didn't think that fat was bad.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I thought it was so interesting. I don't remember where I got this, but in like certain cultures, there are not eating disorders. Like it's definitely a cultural issue, which is sad.
Right, it is. And what's really, the more diet culture that you have, the more eating disorders that you have, the more, when we look at diet culture, like it's prescribed, over the last 10 years, we've prescribed however many diets and weight loss surgeries and all these different things. And obesity has only gotten worse. So like clearly, like it has like a 95% fail rate. So why do we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting it to get better? It's not getting better. It's getting worse. Obviously, this is not the solution. It's creating more of the problem. And not that obesity is a problem. I think that's overemphasized, but the classification of people into certain categories and deeming that they're unhealthy and, all of that.
Absolutely. Which speaks to kind of what you're using to combat that, because you're not saying like don't not do anything,
right?
But kind of tapping into that intuitive eating piece of like your mind body, like what is my body
mindfulness, savoring your food. Like it's not that there's it's not that there's nothing you can do. It's that what we're doing is creating more disorder with food and more behaviors with food and just more things that are making us more unhealthy. I keep saying more, but
more and
it's
more.
Just worse. It's getting worse. But yeah, so what we're doing is really what's creating the problem. We're using this, what we think the solution is, and is really the problem. Yeah. And so there's definitely different ways to approach it. Weight inclusivity is so important. Having I had someone cry in my office that their doctor, like a doctor here in Dallas, said, like, basically didn't comment on their weight. This is a person in a larger body, didn't comment on their weight and praised them for being physically active. And she cried because that was the first time she had gone to a doctor and not been reprimanded for not being like on a diet or like actively, trying to restrict to lose weight. And she cried about it. And those are people's lived experiences. Like the type of treatment that people in varied bodies get is awful, and that is so harmful to our mental health and our physical health. We're figuring out.
Yeah, I was excited to see, I think HuffPost just did a spot on this gal who is in a larger body but very much active. Did you see this?
Was it
recently who she was running ultramarathons?
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And I mean, she does not have what we think, is the typical runner body,
right,
so to say.
Right.
But yet she's out there killing it, running like over 100K, which is, I don't know how many miles, but way too many. Right.
Not a runner.
But, and then, there was just an unsolicited comment from somebody who was supposed to be like a health professional or something of the sort about, well, I'm concerned for you in terms of that much activity with, taking a toll on your body.
Well, and that's like, that's a perfect example of like, here, I think I'm helping you. Like, let me tell you.
Right.
And maybe it's because I think nutrition is, in my personal life, I like really hate telling people what I do, because people take their food stuff so personally and everyone thinks that they're right. And so I just like don't tell people what I do, which is really a shame, but
I'm a teacher.
I just don't talk about it until someone forces me to. I'm like, I'm a dietitian.
I think I've learned can relate to that.
I've learned to not to say that I'm a therapist.
Because then it's like the spilling of all the things. Exactly, same situation. But everyone then like and I've had friends who have asked me questions and then they'll sit there and argue with me that I'm wrong. And I'm like, okay.
Why did you ask me?
Why did you ask me? It's just everyone feels so strongly about it, and it's very convicted about it. And maybe I think sometimes
That's so true. I've never thought about that, but it is like
I think
very serious.
yes, and I think the problem is if it's wrong, then what? Like if I'm wrong, if all of this stuff that I've been doing or all this diet culture stuff, like everything that I know is wrong, well, then what happens? Like their whole
There's no hope.
it crumbles,
For-
right? Like there's like, I don't know what to do. And that's when people come to my office, I feel like my office is kind of like a last resort because people get to my office, they're like, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm like, don't worry, there's another way we can do. And so maybe I should talk about like the other way, because we've been talking about all the negative stuff, but like maybe the other way.
absolutely, yeah.
So viewing,
What can we do?
Yeah, what can we do? So viewing all foods as good. I tell my patients, like, you can give me any food and I'll tell you how it benefits your body, because it does. Like every food can benefit your body. And what ends up happening with that diet cycle is that when we put foods off limits, we then biologically want them more and psychologically want them more. So we crave them, right?
Like physically crave.
Physically crave
as
or
well as
mentally crave.
Right.
Right.
And it's not because you are weak
Right.
or
It's
that
right.
you're not
It's
disciplined.
biological.
It's
real.
there's
Science
real science behind it of putting things like there's biological science behind it, and then there's like psychological science behind it. Anytime we put something off limits, we're gonna want it so much more. And I always kind of describe it as like if a child came into our room and I had a blue pen and I said, you can touch anything in this room except this blue pen. All they're going to want to do is touch that. Like they're going to think,
All I
oh,
want is
that's
that blue
special.
pen.
Like, what does it do?
That magic wand
right,
she has.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of what happens when we put foods off limits. So obviously I wouldn't suggest, going full steam and buying all of the foods that you've put off limits, but start small. Pick something that maybe is like a little anxiety provoking or a little like, oh yeah, sometimes I feel a little iffy with this food, and really legalize it and normalize it. And that might mean eating it every day or eating it every couple of days, and make it something that is always provided for you, so that then it's just not that big of a deal anymore.
Okay. So I've heard this, and a lot of people do this. Well, I can't keep it in my house.
Yes.
Right. And so you're saying, no, allow that to happen.
Keep it in your house.
Keep it in a house. And I mean, for those that have binged or, overconsumed at some point, do you recommend that they have, I guess, kind of some sort of portion control and not buying out, like, say, boxes and boxes of cereal, if that's
Right. Obviously. Right. So if you're really struggling with this, you need to see a professional and really work through the steps of like legalizing all these foods, because there's so many intricate details to this. But throwing everything out of the house just makes it so that the next time you're around it, it's going to be so much worse. And there will be another time that you will either give in and purchase it, or go to someone else's house and have someone else bring it to your house, go to a party. I mean, there will be another time that you're around that food. It will be there. And so it's not a matter of if, it's when. And so if you can, some suggestions that I have are like, you can go both ways. Like sometimes for certain people, I'll say, buy that and go ahead and put it into individual baggies. So you at least have to pause and think about what you're doing before you open another baggie or something like that. But really, it's all about sit down with that food, be conscious, be aware, make sure it's a balanced meal, make sure it's a balanced snack. Don't eat out of containers. You're always going to eat more if you're eating don't eat in front of the TV. That's just so mindless. And so that's more of that disconnection of brains up here, bodies down here. And you're not going to be able to feel your fullness if you're disconnected. So you really want to be mindful. You want to be slow, methodical kind of about it. To really savor what you're eating. Because when you're eating something really quickly or mindlessly, you're not even tasting it. And that's how we're able to eat so much more quantity than we feel is normal, because we're not even tasting it, and we're not connected, and we're not feeling our fullness. And in order to feel our fullness, we have to give ourselves 20 minutes, because it takes 20 minutes for the brain and the stomach to communicate back and forth. So if we eat something in 5 minutes, we'll know in 20 what we feel like. And so if you think about someone who is grazing or overeating, like you can fit a lot of food in your body in 20 minutes if you're not paying attention. And then the 20 minutes hits and you're miserable, right? But if you slow down and you're actually being mindful and savoring your food, that 20 minutes, it just provides you with the ability to stop more appropriately.
Yeah. And it's, I think an element of this that I talk with some of my clients who I also work with disordered eating to shift from, just focusing solely on the food and having an experience, a positive experience, right? Because food is meant to be an experience so that it can be pleasurable, right?
Well, and I say too, like we can't get rid of the pleasure factor with food. Like that is how our brain works, and it's survival, because if food wasn't pleasurable, we wouldn't care about it. We wouldn't seek it out.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've had that thought. Like, if I didn't have to eat, I could get so much more done. I know that's a little unhealthy. All right, I'm working on it.
Okay, Julia.
But it really, like, it uses this pleasure center, the pleasure center of our brain, just like a little hit, right there. But if that didn't happen, we would just die off as a species. And people feel so guilty for wanting food or feeling enjoyment with food. And I'm like, it's supposed to be there. Like, yes, food is fuel, but it's also meant to be pleasurable. It's meant to be fun.
A social connector.
Right, social connector. It's very cultural. I love that part about food. Like, that's so fun. But what diet culture and eating disorders and everything that falls under those umbrellas do is they rip that from our lives. And we spend so much time thinking about food in a negative way, and it really detracts from our life and doing things that actually have more value to us than obsessing about food and weight and body.
That sounds so much more enjoyable too, to have a meal that like I'm slow, I'm mindful, I'm enjoying the company.
Yes.
Versus
it's very like, I kind of describe it as
European
like,
almost.
that's what I was going to say.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. European. Well, and when you really look at the stats or whatever, and I always, I kind of take stats with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But like, they all say like, oh, the European Mediterranean diet or all these things are, they do it so much better. And it's like, well, if you look at the difference in how they eat versus how we eat, I mean, getting someone to sit down for 20 minutes to eat a meal is kind of difficult for me. Like, it's hard for me to get people to do that because, like you said, if you're alone, and like you said, like I could do so much stuff if I didn't spend this much time eating. But like those other cultures really, like that is, I mean, that's just how they do it, right? And that's like a very nice part of their. Yes, absolutely. And I'm like, can we do 20 minutes? Like, we don't even have to do 2 hours. Can we do 20 minutes?
Yeah, but it's, I mean, so common for people to eat lunch at their desks, right?
In the car.
And I'm guilty of this.
In front of the computer. Yeah. I mean, I do it too. And it's like, it's not that the expectation should be that you have a mindful, there's ways to increase mindfulness, but like we can't always have the most mindful meal. So let's be realistic with it. But like most of the time people really can do like lunch and dinner, and if not lunch, dinner, and just baby steps. Like, you're not gonna like, don't go and think you're gonna like change all of your eating habits, but like maybe the first thing you do is like just see how long it takes you to eat a meal, and then the next meal try and make it last 5 minutes longer. Just baby steps to kind of go to a bigger kind of change. Because I think when people hear all this stuff, they're like, oh my God, I'm doing it all wrong. I have to do all this stuff. And it's really overwhelming. Like, don't feel like you need to overhaul it. Like, what is one small thing that I can do that would be a healthful behavior?
Yeah. And it's sustainable.
I love that.
Yes, sustainable. Right. So maybe like
process.
Right. So maybe that means drinking more water. Like maybe that means trying to take longer at meals. Like maybe that means turning off the TV during. It can be something so like whatever feels doable for you, because one of the things that all the diets do is like a huge overhaul, and you have to throw all these things out, and you only can eat these things, and you can have to meal prep all this stuff, and it's so overwhelming. It's so unrealistic for the modern person that I work with, that they can sustain that for a short amount of time, but they eventually fall off the wagon. And then, the diet says, well, you didn't do it right. It was your fault. If you would have just followed it, if you would have just
So true.
if you would have just followed it, you would have succeeded. But it's your fault, and it's like, well,
That you
it doesn't.
can't
It's unrealistic.
Live your whole life, like basically work is
Right. Like,
eating.
can we talk about intermittent fasting, right? And how, like, let's look at some of these diets that really don't make it sustainable.
Right.
I mean, the point that you're making is like, okay, you can plan ahead as much as possible, but what there's a social function, like a birthday, a celebration, and
And food really should kind of enhance your life, not take away from your life. And if you can't go to someone's birthday party and eat whatever is being served, I think that's life sucking. Right? Like that is not life enhancing. I want to be able to go hang out with my friends and eat whatever is provided and not feel any feelings about it. Like maybe I'm like, okay, this is not the best food or whatever. I'm going to eat it though. Because it's like, this is what's for dinner. Right? It's just kind of like sometimes food's just meh, but like sometimes
doesn't have to
food's
be a
really
4-course meal.
delicious. Right.
Yeah.
So you want me to start with intermittent
yeah,
fasting?
can we look at hit the hot diets and hear your viewpoint and why it doesn't work or it's not effective?
Right.
Or
So
it does, whatever your perspective is.
Yeah, sure. let's just hear your thoughts.
so my first disclaimer is that I don't know you guys. I don't know your body. You guys, everyone knows their body better than I do. So I'm just going to say that.
Put that out there.
Just put that out there. But so my thought with intermittent fasting is basically the idea is that if you guys don't know what it is basically the idea that you go for certain amounts of time without eating, right? Mm-hmm. That's my understing of it. And I'm sure there's more details to it. But normally it's a decently long time. Going long periods without time. Most of the time, when people go long periods without time, they get too hungry. They dip down into those too hungry numbers. And then what I call biological autopilot kind of kicks in, and it's like your brain's like, oh my God, I need food. And so then when you do allow yourself to eat, you most likely overeat or get too full as a means of compensation because your body thinks it's in like a drought, like it thinks it's scarcity mode, right? It's like, oh my God,
or starvation
mode. Absolutely. And so people typically who go long periods of time then overeat later. Also, not eating just slows down your metabolism.
Right.
So that's kind of the opposite of what you're trying to do there. And I know a lot of people feels very strongly about intermittent fasting, but science-wise, it slows down your metabolism. So, you're really doing the opposite of what you're trying to do there. And then you're creating this weird food preoccupation. I know this might be TMI, but I had to have a colonoscopy, and I had right. And
I've never had one, so please.
Fun time. So, but I had to fast for probably the longest that I've ever had to fast for, and this was multiple years ago when I was working in a clinical setting. So there's lots of people and they all had lots of food, and it was like I was noticing every piece of food that was there. It was like, oh my God, stuff that I wouldn't even think was sounded good if I was actually nourishing myself. Just stuff that I know is not my preference. And I was just like, oh my God, give it to me. I have to have that thing. I was just so preoccupied with food. So most of the time that's what ends up happening. So not only are there some biological consequences to it, there's a lot of psychological consequences to going long periods of time without eating.
Yeah.
What about keto? I don't even know what it is. Do you know what it is?
Yes, I know what it is. So it first started for
I hate you for making me talk about
treatment of kids with epilepsy, I think. I remember
I didn't even know that.
Didn't know it? Yeah. So that's what the original intent was, and that's what I learned about in school about it. And when you really do it, it's a pretty gross diet. It's you eat bacon and salad dressing and olive oil. It's a high fat diet. That's what it is. Okay. And so what happens, kind of what they say is that when you eat a keto diet or whatever, it'll put you into ketoacidosis, which means you're burning fat to fuel your body. So the body prefers carbohydrates. It's our brain's preferred fuel source, and it's kind of the point of it. It's like putting gas in our car. It makes the body go. It's the easiest breakdown, most efficiently broken down. We get the most energy from a carbohydrate. But when the body doesn't have carbohydrates, it bounces to dietary fat or body fat to use it for fuel. And as a result of the breakdown of fat, we get ketones. And then the ketones are used for energy instead of the carbohydrates. So the idea would be that you lose weight by burning body fat. But if you were truly in ketosis, like you would have eventually have a medical emergency, because being in ketoacidosis, there's different way you pronounce it, but I don't know which one's actually right. But this is the kind of dietitian I am.
Don't super technical.
I don't prescribe it, right? Exactly. So there's a lot of medical consequences that come with actually being in ketoacidosis, and it's what sends diabetics to the hospital so often when they have uncontrolled blood sugar. So the most severe one is a coma.
Okay.
Oh, gosh.
Right.
It's a small one.
Right. So, and then your organs don't like it. The body really likes to be at a very kind of
Equilibrium.
right, kind of middle, just slightly acidic pH. And so when you're in these states, you're more acidic. So you can have organ failure. So when you're following the keto diet that's out there now for the common person, that's not even gonna happen. You're not even in the state that they say you're gonna be in.
But you're doing something that can really hurt you if you were to do it at an extreme. So I don't know why even do it in moderation. Is kind of my thought.
They say to lose weight.
Yes. Yeah.
And so then it goes to it's a low carb diet, right? So
Just Atkins reinvented.
basically every diet is either low carb or low fat. And more commonly, I would say, 90s was real low fat craze. Now it's more low carb. And so what you're doing is you're using those other sources as fuel instead of carbohydrate, but that also means you're breaking down muscle, organs, tissues, and bones to fuel your body, which makes zero sense. And then you're putting yourself at jeopardy to have a really weird relationship with carbohydrates. So carbs, now get all of majority of the bad rap. And everyone just thinks that they're going to cause weight gain and they're bad for you, and no one really knows why. No one can really tell me why, but that's what everyone thinks.
Yeah, that's what I learned. That was when I
carbs are going to make you fat and unhealthy.
Took out carbs.
Yeah,
right.
Which it's scary whenever you said that's what fuels your brain to me.
Yeah. So you've got a bunch of people that are half brain function, walking around driving cars. It is kind of scary. Yeah, totally. And not to mention life is just going to be so much think about trying to do a desk job where you're or any kind of job. Yes, that's people experience brain fog. They have intense cravings. People will feel very addicted to certain foods that they put off limits. And it's very common to feel addicted to food. We're all kind of addicted to food because we have to have food to survive. There's no way to abstain from it. But these diets really, really make us feel crazy with food.
Yeah, because it's just so extreme.
Right.
And we're not meant to live in extreme. And our bodies are not meant to live in extreme, is what you said.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when you really look at just basic nutrition, it's just carbohydrates are 50%, dietary fats 30%, and protein is actually our least needed nutrient at 20%, and it's kind of the golden child. Yeah. And it's not because any of them are more important than the other, it's how the body uses it. And so carbohydrates, when we eat a carbohydrate, we break it down and we turn it into energy, and then we use that energy. And it doesn't have a big storage form like dietary fat and protein does. And so we're kind of on a hamster wheel of carbohydrates, and that's why we have to eat so many of them. So it's not that one's more important than the other. They're just meant to be used for different things. And so when we take out carbohydrates and put dietary fat, so dietary fat's kind of like the nuts and the bolts of the car. Carbohydrates like the gasoline. So that's trying to shove nuts and bolts into our gas tank, right? The car will run for a little bit, but it's eventually going to break down. And so when we take something out to try and replace it with something else, we can sustain that for a while, but there's going to be a time where, again, you fall off the wagon, and then the diet's going to tell you it's because you did it wrong.
Yeah.
It's your fault. And then you're going to feel guilt and shame, and like you have no willpower and it's hopeless. And that's
the
not.
whiplash is real. Right? To go with your analogy.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, laugh at it, but really it is, just it's so tremendous, the after effects, mentally.
So then people will ask me, well, then why do people cut out carbs and lose weight? Well, I think a lot of people overeat carbs. And it's because if you think about what a carb is, it's most of the time shelf stable, it's cheap. It's what people can get a lot of pretty quickly and cheaply. Restaurants give you a lot of it. And then people have really weird relationship with carbohydrates. And when you restrict it, you're more likely to overeat it. And so I think a lot of people either don't eat enough carbs or eat all of the carbs. And it's all about finding that balance of how can I eat carbohydrates to fuel my body, to give it what it needs without going to that other extreme of overeating them. And that's not a simple answer. It's a little different for every person. But that's.
Yeah. We're running close on time, but I do want to hit on what are, if any, some just like standard guidelines that could be helpful because I think about the food pyramid, right? And how so unhelpful it is and not accurate it is. Do you have any kind of like guidelines that you see that will work for most of your patients?
Well, so one thing that I typically recommend is eating every 3 to 5 hours. And so the basis of that is just so that you're eating often enough, you're not dipping into that too hungry zone.
Intermittent eating. New diet.
And so you're not going too long without eating, but then you also have that permission to eat again. So if I'm eating something really yummy that I'm kind of tempted to keep going with past my fullness, then I can eat it again in a couple hours. So permission to eat food. I think figuring out what foods make you feel physically well and and you enjoy the taste of, right? And if you don't enjoy the taste of, don't eat it. And if it doesn't make you feel physically well, don't eat it. You should probably like really dive into that and figure out why it's not making you physically well before you actually cut it out. But, obviously food allergies, you would not want to eat those.
Yeah. But bringing some awareness to
Right.
the body and what you're putting into it, how it makes you feel.
Right.
Slow down in that way.
Right. And then I teach the hunger and fullness scale, which is a little bit more complicated and we don't really have time to totally dive into, but there are definitely resources.
But in general, it's just tapping into
your internal signals to know when to eat and when to not eat. Yeah. And if you really want to get the more information, you can Google hunger and fullness scale and it will come up. It's an intuitive eating principle. But yes, being connected to your physical body to know those cues.
Yeah, how hungry am I right now? Okay, how full am I right now? Right?
Like, am I thirsty, or is there an emotion that I need to address? And maybe this has nothing to do with my physical body. Maybe it has more with my mental. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing would be joyful movement and moving the body in a way that feels good and
sweet.
Joyful
movement.
Yes,
we did joyful movement today.
We did.
Yes, joyful movement, and also providing the body with rest when rest is appropriate, and trying.
It's always appropriate.
It's always appropriate. Yes, and figuring out, trying to navigate the balance of movement and rest, and what is, what are you really needing in those moments.
But I hear this. I guess the theme for this episode is there is no right way.
Right.
It's about being flexible, about giving permission to tune in and tune out what everybody else says.
Right.
And figure out as you go.
Yes. Right? Because what my truth is might not be your truth, and what's good for your body might be slightly different than what's good for my body, and that's what the diets really miss. It's totally individualized and it can look very different from person to person.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Let's pause here real quick before we get into more resources. But we wanted to make sure that we had time to thank our sponsor, Therapy Space, who has been so loyal to us.
Yes, and they're so amazing. They have offices in Dallas and Tennessee, and they're just a group practice that allows you to rent at different flexible schedules and finances and all of that. Julianne.
She's like, I don't know why the words are so hard. We've
Words
been
are
talking
hard
about
today.
them, like if you've been listening to us, but hey, no, you're fine, I tease. So therapy space, for any mental health professionals in beautifully done offices, and they just take the load off of starting a practice.
If you're just starting out or just don't want the responsibility.
Yeah. So if you're a professional listening to this and you mention our podcast, you will get a discount.
1 month free.
1 month free.
Yes.
So
if you're in the market, Casey. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, Therapy Space. They're amazing. Yeah. Okay, let's get into some resources. What are some books that would be helpful for people if they want to learn more information about this topic?
Sure. So Intuitive Eating is a book, and one of their founders is newly on Instagram, which you should go find her because she's one of the Evelyn. She's amazing. I mean, just like free golden nuggets, just every post. So they also have a workbook for anyone who wants to work through the steps. So those are great resources. Health at Every Size, like we mentioned, the obesity myth is a great one. That talks about kind of how our obsession with health is making us more unhealthy. For more Body Kindness is another one that's written by a fellow non-diet dietitian, and it's really great. And then there's a lot of really great podcasts. Food Psych's a great podcast. There's so many resources, and I really recommend kind of putting yourself in this anti-diet bubble of media and everything, and just immerse yourself in it.
Yeah, kind
RIOTS,
of
not diets.
cleansing your Instagram.
Yes. Get rid of all that stuff. Yeah.
And an awesome resource is yourself, and you're here in Dallas. Yes.
Yes, I'm here in Dallas. I have a website, dallasnutritionalcounseling.com. I have a blog. I do recipes and also informational stuff.
Your blog is amazing. You have the best one-liner quotes. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's what I needed to hear today.
And her Instagram, we were just talking about, she really has these awesome, really educationally and eloquent quotes.
Thank you.
On her,
Well, and so I actually haven't shared this, so this is an exclusive.
Oh.
I think I've only told my family, but I'm actually in the process of writing an ebook.
Oh, amazing.
Yes, so that's out there, so it's happening. So you can, if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, you'll get information. I'm about to go into pre-sale mode, and
I'm so
really
excited. I can't wait to get
nerve-wracking.
it. Even just hearing you talk now.
Saying this now is making my heart go so fast.
It's real. It's happening.
Yes. So be on the lookout for that. I'm sure it'll be all over my Instagram too.
Yes.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, Casey, we can't thank you enough for being a part of the anti-diet revolution.
Yes, you're so welcome. Happy to
Sharing
be
your
here.
message. Yes. Okay, we'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for listening to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. Don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes and share with your friends. It really helps us reach more people.
We might only record once a week, but we're with you every day.